Anne represents the Interreg project I was mentioning at the beginning, and they have done a lot of work with public authorities analyzing rural proofing in different member states. So she will enlighten us with the results of that work within that project. So Anne, the floor is yours. Let me remember if a colleague needs to share your presentation.
Yes.
Or you will do it yourself.
Yes.
I think you will
I
do it
will
yourself.
share.
No, Veneta will do it on your behalf. So just let us know when you want want us to change the slide. So Anne, the floor is yours.
Yeah, when this slide is loading, so I'm Anne Pöder from Estonian University of Life Sciences. So I'm chair of rural economics. And I will talk shortly what we studied in our ongoing Interreg projects. So next slide. So this is an ongoing Interreg project for some partners, and so concentrating on 4 countries: Bulgaria, Ireland, Estonia, and Spain. With this, in Spain, it's this Navarra autonomous region. And it's a combination of different authorities, ministries, this regional governments. And overall, this project's main objective just to work how to improve overall this governance capacity to implement and develop the methodology for rural proofing, and actually how to integrate it to this overall this decision-making process and policies. And more specifically, that over the 4 years to develop methodology, adjust it, and further develops these country-based models that would work in this country context. Part of this, what I will be talking about, is a comparative study we are conducting, and this mix of co-learning through different workshops to end up in the situation that in 2 years there would be a good basis for each country. Methodology and related to examples of what methodologies, toolbox practices could be integrated to this toolbox that could be further used to proceed with implementation of rural proofing. Next slide. So, and basically what we work as a subcontractor for our one of the partners, Estonian Ministry of Regional Development and Rural Affairs. And what we've been doing with them is work with other partners to analyze this information they put together on this current situation related to rural proofing in these 4 countries, but also conducted a questionnaire survey of these different experts, focus groups, and supporting this interregional workshop. And basically, our more specific objective is to collect this information, to assess what is the current situation related to this rural proofing implementation challenges, and find good examples, innovative solutions, suggestion solutions, what to recommend, how to further proceed with the rural proofing process. Next slide. And I give you this example based on Estonia, how the currently rural proofing process is working. So the institution who is responsible for advancing it's the Ministry of Regional Affairs and Agriculture. So it was this already 4 years ago, this official decision by the government to implement, and this ministry developed the rural proofing guidelines. So it applies for national level draft legislation and different national level strategic plans. Overall, the process is that if a new draft legislation of strategic plan is in the process of being developed, this draft act should be prepared, and part of it is a short assessment what could be potential impacts. And part of these impacts, there is a list of impacts. This includes assessment of regional impacts, and in part of this, if there is detected that it could have different impacts on rural and urban areas, then this ministry or this part of the department who is working with this should proceed with using the guidelines and proceeding with this rural proofing process. So it is guidelines, it's a checklist. And with examples also what kind of data to use. So when the rural proofing steps is first this mapping of situation, identification of stakeholders. So what could be this difference between urban rural data collection, impact assessment itself, and mitigation measures. So and what is asked is to assess this in these guidelines impacts in 5 categories: impact on the employment, impact of this competitiveness of the enterprises, population, availability of services, and this connectivity related to transportation and IT infrastructure. So this process is there, and so it's technically, if it's detected in the process that there could be different impacts, so we could say that technically it's mandatory. But now it gets this situation a little bit tricky because if in this draft legislation process the ministry or department who is working with this says just that okay, we basically probably there's no impact, so then just they don't have to justify it, and so it's a little bit there's a lack of information how well it is actually implemented. So and this there has been no specific review of how who have and how much they have this applied this rural proofing this guidelines. So ministry itself, there's people working there, they non-formally track it. But basically they do that in this overall legislative drafting process. They if it's coordinated between the different ministries, they can ask. Require this information. Was it applied? How it was? What were impacts? Next slide. So it is that for particularly in Estonian situation, as I said, that it exists, but then it gets a little bit more murkier of how it's actually applied. What I've been a little bit talk about is what we did part of the project. We had expert service, over 200 stakeholders in all 4 countries, who are represented ministries, regional authorities, local authorities, research organizations, and different interest groups and non-profits, like for example, leader or local action groups. And we ask them this list of questions: what is their experience and what is their views, how to proceed with this rural proofing topic. And overall, if we first started with the first question, how well the overall think that this policy making and the planning process so far has addressed in their countries the rural needs of rural areas. And so it was a bit not unexpected that they tend to had quite negative views based on this issue in the situation, and they gave a lot of examples what have been the issues related typically what kind of policies or what is related to this energy regulation and policies, housing, different infrastructure, transportation schedules, transportation infrastructure projects that are a lot of examples to this, in which quite often this rural specific circumstances have been neglected. So next slide. And when we started, then we started with also with questions about how familiar you are in overall this rural proofing. So in these terms, we had in Estonia, okay, half of our stakeholders said that they know the term and know it, but in other countries it was considerably higher. But this knowledge itself was there. But then when we started asking some questions, is it rural proofing actually implemented in their countries? In this case, in most cases, that in all countries, it was over from 30 to half have said that they don't know actually, that even though they know terms, but they don't know how it is implemented. Or in this case, between close to half agrees all countries says that it's actually not implemented. So it is a good example, for example, in Estonia, that so there is rural proofing procedures is there, but the stakeholders themselves less like around a quarter had any kind of experience or knew actually anything about the implementation. So we proceeded to ask them also how it's conducted, in what level how it should be conducted. Is it mandatory, voluntary? And it was a good example that in most cases they had very, very limited knowledge, and we only counted from out of these 200 a few people who could answer how it is. Particularly we had examples, even those persons who had experience with actually conducting rural proofing, that they couldn't name actually that even if this was detected in the rural proofing process, that there are different impacts on rural and urban areas, but they couldn't name the actual policy or what was later changed. Next slide. We asked everyone how to proceed. So should it be a mandatory or voluntary? So it was in overall that it should be mandatory. So this is example overall if it should be mandatory in mostly in the regional national level. And what is so far the biggest issue is that even if the procedures are there, actually how it is implemented tends to be more challenging. And in particular, it is at the interest of the public sector to actually proceed and implement it meaningfully. The process. What it came up after this lack of interest, the particular obstacles, is all this related to this monitoring or collecting data. If it's actually implemented, this following up, that if there was some changing, what happened to them, and communicating this information back to stakeholders. This followed by obviously the skills and knowledge how to do it effectively that constantly came up. And the lack of good data is pretty much the same topics what we have discussed today here. And so next slide. What would be that we are finishing that main expectations on solutions or would be the main messages related to this. So it came up constantly the topic that if it's fully voluntary, then it will not be implemented. So there must be some kind of mandatory element so at least starting from this, the national levels, because so it's nice to say that yes, let's do it voluntary, but they will not implement it. So this issue with the monitoring and systematic evaluation, we are even in situation in Estonia when we don't actually have a good data that how it was implemented, who decided, like, does it have rural impact or not, and if any kind of changes were actually made. So when related to this, that if there was any kind of changes made to this policy or this amendment, then why? So, and this question on one, what are these current processes can we demonstrate in any kind of success? And also what have been this overall in this process, the current implementation, these shortcomings. So related to all this running through it, is this how to communicate it. It is particularly challenged that if we look at stakeholders, the typical stakeholders who are engaged, then their expectation is that when they participate in the process, that they will see that there is some kind of impact on their lives and actually to this policy implementation. But this rural proofing process in itself, basically those implemented it, they can put together this information, but this part of this political decision that typically it falls outside this administration or this process itself. So what it related to this, that public sector interest is one of the big obstacles that came down, that to work with, to build up this actual will, this awareness of this starting from national level, proceeding also with this regional authorities and the local level to actually implement the rural proofing and try to do it in meaningful fair. So what it is related, particularly with the local stakeholders, this information, quite transparency and information, why is rural proofing done, how they are engaged in the process, how is their input taken into account, and this typical situation what they complained about a lot was that they have taken time and effort to put it, but they don't get the feedback, they don't get any meaningful this later engagement of why their opinions and interest were not considered. So, and this related to this that even if this toolbox and is mostly intended for this national level, but this that it could include different tools, including that could be well applied into this other kind of regional and local levels, and it include how to build up this communication. In particular, the issue also that it could be that stakeholders saying yes, we could do it, but if we don't have actually resources for it, so it's not specifically send resources for us, so financials, time to actually conduct it. And the last slide. And related to this, let's run through the other topics. What to build, how to improve the process itself, that compared what is available for now, to have more information and particularly good demonstrations. What could be these procedures, how to build up the stakeholders, what is good procedure for stakeholder network list that would be updated, how to do meaningful stakeholder engagement. Particularly who is in this process of stakeholder engagement. This is particularly some of the issue came up from our case in Estonia, that if it's some of the national level organizations, but not local level actors are not taken into account, and they are expected to be a passive actors. So bringing on the good practitioners and working with related to overall communications that after this engagement and this initial impact assessment, there are some follow-up procedures and later assessment. Related to information gathering, what is this overall information on rural areas, what is different types of rurals, what is actually rurals, and what is this supporting data availability. And this collecting from information from these rural areas themselves and on-site and integrating into the process. So when to end up to this overall rural proofing toolbox, what would be that it includes good practical examples advice, a lot of demonstrations and tools related to overall communication, engagement, overall policy development, data processing, and ex post assessment of monitoring practices. So overall, the main message was that from these stakeholders that they need to build more meaningful engagement, demonstration of good practices and success stories, and very clear communication. But how to do it exactly would be a little bit more challenging. So this is all.
So we have the pleasure to count for this afternoon session with the representative from the GRANULAR Horizon Europe project, David Millard. Good afternoon, David. Welcome and thank you. And as Enrique spoiled, you have already some good results from the Living Labs in GRANULAR, which include also rural proofing. So we have asked you to prepare a presentation and to tell us a bit more about the outcomes of this process that you have been doing in GRANULAR so far. So I believe you will share your presentation.
I will. Good afternoon, Patricia, and thank you for that introduction. I will share my copy of the slides.
Perfect.
And you can confirm if you can see them.
So we see you have to click in the presentation mode. We see the how do you say it? So you click in the display setting exactly to switch to the presenter view. So we see here. Yeah, perfect. Thanks,
okay.
David. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Patricia, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for the opportunity to contribute to the Policy Lab. I'll also introduce Julia Martino from Mcrit, who's in the same breakout group, and Julia is part of this process and led the deliverable to which we'll make reference, and invite her to comment at the end of these slides. I realise the task we've been invited to comment on is about who and the rural proofers, but to give you some context to the slides which follow, I'll introduce the purpose of the rural proofing in GRANULAR, enriching knowledge for rural actors on the diversity of and within rural areas, and the functional characteristics, challenges and opportunities. And as we've already heard this morning, there's a role for rural proofing, and for us, key element of the rural proofing outcomes is the provision of empirical evidence from local communities and stakeholders of the implications of policies on and within rural areas, so recognising the diversity within rural areas. And we've done this with a set of living and replication labs, taking on particular initiatives and contributing their perspective on the rural proofing of those initiatives in their territories. And our process for doing this is accessible out with the forum today, but we've developed a plan which builds on the long-term vision for rural areas and the rural compass of GRANULAR. Both of these provide elements for us to focus discussion and thinking about the extent to which an initiative or a policy has an effect, positive, neutral or negative, on areas, including the different levels within governance of a rural area, and to try and capture that information and use it to assess the extent to which an initiative is considered rural proofed, and report those with respect to the 4 pillars or action areas of the long-term vision. And we designed it to align with the Better Regulation Toolbox, and the methodology, which we'll not go into because that's really from this morning's conversation, but is summarised in the bottom about identifying the policy, summarising its components, undertaking its assessments, and then looking at the data availability and reporting on that. The exercises which we've run across 8 living and replication labs were selected by the labs to do so that it was processes that were within their remit and areas of responsibility, plus one theme, which was across multiple labs during a cross visit that took place in France. And it's on a carpooling strategy implemented by that region and the living lab that it links to. So I say that because we've got territorially specific initiatives and one initiative which is viewed across multiple territories. And the sorts of findings that we've got from these are that all of them were deemed to be rural proof, but several revealed risks of unequal impacts across rural areas. So inequalities were significantly identified. That quantitative impacts, both the polarity and magnitude, showed internal consistency with the qualitative narratives, to which I'll make mention in a moment. And that the characteristic of the assessments was about positivity and optimism regarding the outcomes. And that is an issue which we'll come back to and may reflect the rural proofers involved. But the other observation to draw out here is that the direct positive impacts, generally speaking, were conditional upon infrastructure. That might be digital, or it might be physical, it might be human capital, it might be funding. Whereas the indirect impacts were usually associated with policies or initiatives with no dedicated budget or responsibility for funding. And that then leads to consideration of how one does the rural proofing and what extent one can expect the rural proofers to be able to do that. So turning then to those rural proofers, this was, as I say, through the granular living and replication labs. So it's the structure of recruiting into those labs which has given us our set of rural proofers. What they are doing is providing a collective approach to considering the initiative chosen through a specifically rural lens. And the headings which I'll draw attention to are, first of all, who to involve with respect to the level of governance, both of the governance of the territory where the initiative's originating and being implemented, and secondly, the governance and the remits of the organisations invited to do the rural proofing. And those two need not be the same. And a discussion and an understanding of potential conflicts of interest or of lack of insight are of significance when then interpreting the assessments of the rural proofing. The governance level of significance also links then to whether it's a thematic review of the rural proofing or a territorially specific review. And we've tested both, and both of them were identified unintended negative consequences or differences in implications between different types of rural areas. So for instance, with respect to remoteness or islands or mountainous or floodplain areas. So looking at the granularity within these living labs where the areas they represent, there are some sub-areas which will be more negatively impacted than others, depending on what the topic was. And the final observation on this really is that what we have brought to bear is a combination of communities of interest and of place. And generally the communities of interest are where the domain expertise lies, the knowledge of where data might be found, of the access to models, formal or informal, of what consequences there might be, environmental, social, economic, of an aspect of an initiative against the elements in the rural compass and the long-term vision, but also of place. And place might include practice, expertise and knowledge, territorial history, and some of the nuances that are significant in a place, which will not be significant in another place. And it might be that an adverse impact on one rural area is because of some aspect of its cultural heritage, which is not replicated somewhere else. With respect to geographic level, the greater prospect of consistency of data across an area would be when there's an issue which is geographically focused. But inconsistencies can arise between regions within the same nation or even sub-region, lower levels of governance, depending on how those data have been collected at national, local, or indeed by NGO, citizen science, or formal government approaches such as a census or economic reviews. And what we found is that the process has been helping actors reflect on where impacts might be experienced, who might be experiencing those impacts, and why they differ between social places. And so our observations on who the rural proofers are, which links to earlier conversation in the morning, is we believe you need the science, policy, and practice, and that would be of a science policy society interface. And the lab model provides a means of bringing together members who are knowledgeable in the topics, so the domains, and supporting evidence interpretation. But there is a need for iteration between a lab secretariat and its membership. Other models which one might consider, and you see being referred to this morning, the formal consultation model, consultancy model, and public agency model, these were ones which we have not tested or implemented. And as noted earlier, if it can be early in the process of preparation of the policy, then that is when one can more greatly influence the policy and the significance of, mitigate the significance of any adverse impacts. Otherwise, the reflections post-implementation require something which is not really rural proofing to resolve it. So we concur with that, but we allowed our labs to look at ex post and ex ante, and we'll be doing another iteration of this. But what it showed was that the lab's experiences, that it was easier and with greater confidence that they could assess the effects when the initiative was already implemented. So at our stage of progress in gathering knowledge about how this works and how to improve the process, the labs which had opportunities to reflect on the impacts that they could then point to with greater confidence, well, that gives us some sense of what sort of data do they use, what sort of information would then be used to provide that evidence, and to what extent could any of that be made available for running of the rural proofing early or continually through the development of a policy or initiative. And then just concluding in relation to data and indicators, our findings were so far that standard indicators, that might be population, census, demographics, and so on, were often insufficient, particularly with respect to indirect impacts. Well-targeted indicators for elements may be conceptually clear and backed by standard data sources, but the indicators that were more reflective on the initiative may be different from those that would be most effective for reporting on progress on the elements of the rural proofing framework. And here we make a distinction then about the rural proofing, what it's being assessed against, and the extent to which the initiatives which are supposed to deliver on certain themes, such as those of the action areas of long-term vision, may diverge in terms of their impacts on a territory or peoples. So where data were lacking, what the process guided was the lab members towards generating hypothesis and qualitative insights, which then we can begin to quantitatively validate subsequently. And several were cognizant of European or national level frameworks, which gave them links to the sorts of data sources they could use for assessing the impact on bioeconomy, for instance, and the bioeconomic possibilities of an environment strategy. But the policy types that were chosen do affect the indicator suitability. So direct interventions are easier to monitor and to measure, whereas strategic or enabling policies require a more nuanced approach to data strategies. And the data collected were from the equivalent of LAOU2 right up to NUTS 3. So there was a greater emphasis on very local data, including citizen-produced data, and then the practice expertise and practice knowledge that's coming from more site-specific. And that was important when thinking about structures to consider local versus regional and the sorts of articulation of impacts. And I'll conclude then with just noting how we're reporting these in fiches for each of the initiatives by each of the labs, and the articulation of the main impacts with respect to the 4 action areas of the long-term vision. And with that, I'll pause and happy for I or Julia to pick up conversation as it emerges.
To make this data that we found, to make it accessible and useful, we created the RUSTIK viewer, and we will see that in a moment. And as tools by themselves were not enough, we conducted several training sessions related to participatory mapping tools, data scrapping, and data analysis. These are the 3 main approaches that we took in relation to data. So going directly into the RUSTIK viewer, the RUSTIK viewer is an open source tool that brings together multiple types of data across different scales. This viewer is integrating 3 main types of data. This is what we have here. First, it is integrating existing secondary data from European agencies and programs. Here, for example, we would have Eurostat. Second, it integrates new quantitative data sources that come from geodata scrapping or big data. And third, it is integrating local data that has been gathered through the Living Labs experimentation processes. So this is unique data for the Living Labs that we have in the project. These different types of data are being integrated in the viewer into different sections. We have an European level database, and then we have the Living Labs specific sections. This would be the structure of the RUSTIK viewer. Going to the European level, we have integrated over 100 data layers, and as for the Living Labs data section, we have included more than 90 layers into this moment. We are including more information in the following weeks and months. And here we have one example for an indicator displayed in the viewer for the European section. In this case, we can see the projected change in meteorological forest fire danger, and you can see that we have here the sections, the topics, and we have the indicator. For each of the indicators, we have the source, the organization, the year, and the source to access the data and download it. And then we have the description of the indicator. And here we have another example. In this case, we can see the distance to hospitals. And this data comes from the ESPON Prophecy project, and it is available for the different services of general interest. Here we have some of the indicators that we are considering and that are available in this RUSTIK viewer. Because in RUSTIK, we are also analyzing the suitability of the 5 concepts of rural functions, and for that we mapped which data indicators available in the viewer correspond to each of the different concepts of rural functions. And in this slide, we focus on the first function, which is the provision of ecosystem services. For this function, we have integrated data on the proportion of land covered by forests. We also have data related to agriculture, also data related, for example, to the projected changes in climate-related risks. And indicators that we have in here should help us understand how rural areas contribute to environmental values and also how they are exposed or expected to be affected by ecological risks. In here, we have the second function, which is the innovative infrastructures and services. And in the indicators that we have in here, we have data related to the accessibility of services of general interests. We have here schools, we have healthcare centers, we have public transport and other essential services. In the third function, which is the provision of land-based products, we have indicators that cover sectors such as agriculture, forestry, and renewable energy production. In the fourth function, we have here this function is focusing on the production systems. This means the diversity and also the structure of economic activities that are present in rural areas. And the indicators that we have compiled here are related to commercial, industrial, restoration, and tourism activities. And as for the fifth rural function, which is related to the social capital and cultural assets, we have incorporated indicators that touch on equality, social integration indicators. We also have educational levels and the quality of governance. This is a little bit an overview of the types of data that we are considering. Apart from the European level database, we have a specific database for the different living labs. In this case, we are progressively integrating the local datasets that are being provided by the different living labs. In that sense, the quantity and the quality of the data varies across the different regions. It depends on the type of the data that they are submitting and also on the context of each of the living labs. But we have indicators in diverse topics that answer to the specific necessities that these living labs have. For example, we have data on the agricultural structure of the business types, also on population dynamics, on the broadband connectivity and other types of topics. And this data is being integrated into the RUSTIK viewer progressively. Here we have an example of an indicator for one of the living labs, which is the Osona living lab that is located in Catalonia. And we can see here the points of cultural activity in the region. We have here the points of the cultural assets that we have in the region, and then we have the heat map of these activities. And in here we have another example, which is the points of the energy certification of the different residential households. We can see by the colors reflect the ABC, the category in the energy certification. And then here we have the last example, which is the indicator of acoustic pollution, also for the same living lab. We have the different gradient of color, which is indicating a better or a worse acoustic pollution. And this is what we have prepared to have a brief look into the RUSTIK viewer, but we invite you to have a look. You have here the link to the data viewer, and you can also access it in the RUSTIK webpage. There's one specific section that is called RUSTIK viewer, and we are continuously integrating more data and also advancing on the functionalities and the more aesthetic components of the viewer. So we invite you to go over the platform during the following weeks and months. Thank you very much. I hope it was useful.